I thought kindness was harmless. Just spare change. A few quiet conversations. Something human in a city that rarely slowed down. He sat on the same bench every morning. I never asked his name. He never asked mine. At first, it felt safe, almost comforting. Until he started remembering things I never told him, the days I wasn't there. The route I took home. The way my schedule shifted. I told myself I was being paranoid. Because how dangerous could someone be? When everyone else walked past him without a second glance? But kindness can turn into expectation. And expectation can turn into control, the moment he touched my arm. I realized I wasn't helping someone anymore. I was being watched. And that was the day I understood. I had let the wrong person get too close. The morning my husband died, the house felt unnaturally still. I remember standing in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair across the table, waiting for a sound that would never come. No cough. No footsteps. No voice asking for coffee. That was 16 months ago. People told me grief softened with time. They didn't warn me about the silence. My name is Helen Brooks. I was 62 years old, and suddenly, I was alone in ways I had never prepared for. My husband, Thomas, had handled everything for as long as I could remember. Finances. Repairs. Appointments. Even grocery shopping, especially after my hip surgery made walking painful. When he was gone, I discovered how fragile my life really was. Medical bills had drained nearly everything. The insurance barely covered the funeral. What I thought was security turned out to be habit. My daughter lived 3 states away. She called when she could. My son had his own family, his own struggles, so I did what desperate widows do when there are no good choices left. I sold the house we'd lived in for nearly 3 decades and moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of Cleveland, quiet, aging, forgettable. Then I found work. At my age, with limited mobility and outdated skills, options were scarce. But Harbolite Senior Services, a modest community center for older adults, needed a part-time front desk coordinator. The pay was minimal. The hours were short. But it gave me a reason to wake up. Every morning, I took the bus downtown and got off 2 stops early so I could walk the rest of the way. The doctor said it helped my hip. The truth was, it helped my heart. That's when I noticed him. He sat on the same bench outside the public library every morning. An elderly black man with silver hair, a straight back, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He never asked for money. Never called out. Never complained. Just sat there quietly, a paper cup at his feet, watching the city rush past him. Something about his presence felt familiar. The first time I stopped, I didn't say much. I placed a few dollars in his cup and wished him a good day. He looked up at me and smiled. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. "That means more than you know." I walked away with tears in my eyes, and no idea why. I didn't know then that this quiet routine, this small daily kindness, was about to save my life. After that first morning, I didn't plan on stopping again. But the next day, my bus arrived early. And so did I. He was there already, sitting on the same bench, hands folded neatly in his lap as if he were waiting for someone. This time, I brought coffee. I handed him the cup without a word, embarrassed by how intentional the gesture felt. He accepted it carefully, like it was something fragile. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," I replied. "But I wanted to." That became our unspoken agreement. I never asked his name. He never asked mine. We talked about harmless things. The weather. The city. How fast everything seemed to change. He had a calm way of speaking that made time slow down. He listened without interrupting, without trying to fix anything, something I hadn't realized I missed. Over the weeks, my routine adjusted itself around those few minutes on the bench. I started carrying extra change in my coat pocket. Sometimes a sandwich if I skipped lunch. I told myself it was kindness. But it was more than that. At Harbolite, my days were quiet. Seniors came and went. Paperwork stacked up. Conversations stayed polite and shallow. Outside, on that bench, I felt seen. One morning, I finally asked him how long he'd been there. Long enough, he said with a small smile. Longer than most people notice. I nodded, understanding more than I expected, told me he'd worked most of his life as a machinist at a manufacturing plant that closed years ago. After his wife passed, things unraveled slowly. Medical bills, missed rent, bad timing layered on bad luck. No drama. No self-pity. Just facts. I told him about my husband. About the house I'd sold. About learning how to live smaller than I ever imagined. He didn't offer advice. He just listened. One morning, as I stood up to leave, he reached out suddenly and touched my sleeve. Not hard. Not threatening. Just enough to stop me. Be careful today, he said quietly. People don't always see what they're doing. I laughed it off. But as I walked away, a strange chill settled in my chest. Because for the first time, I realized something unsettling. He wasn't just listening to me. He was watching me. And I didn't yet know what that meant. I told myself I was imagining things. That the unease I felt had more to do with my own loneliness than anything else. But the small changes kept adding up. He began arriving earlier than before. If I was late, he noticed. You weren't here yesterday, he said one morning, his tone casual but his eyes searching my face. I took a different bus, I replied. He nodded slowly, as if filing the information away. Our conversations shifted, too. He started asking more questions, about my schedule, my apartment, whether I lived alone. When I answered vaguely, he smiled and said he was just making conversation. I believed him. Or maybe I wanted to. One afternoon, I didn't have any change with me. I apologized, feeling strangely guilty. That's all right, he said. You've already done plenty. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. As if kindness were something that could be measured. Tallied. Repaid. A week later, rain poured down without warning. I hesitated on the sidewalk, unsure how to manage the slick pavement with my hip. I'll walk you to the bus stop, he said, already standing. I should have said no. Instead, I thanked him. He stayed too close as we walked, matching my pace exactly. When we reached the stop, he lingered. You don't have to come by every day, I said lightly. I'll be fine. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I know, he replied. But you will. That night, lying awake in my apartment, his words replayed in my mind. But you will. I tried skipping my usual stop the next morning. He was still there. Waiting. And for the first time since my husband died, I felt something sharper than grief. I felt watched. It happened on a morning that felt painfully ordinary. The sky was gray. The street smelled like wet concrete. I was already late. I told myself to walk past him. Just keep moving. But as I reached into my pocket for my transit card, I felt it, his hand closed around my arm. Not hard enough to leave a bruise. Not gentle enough to be an accident. Wait, he said. I froze. People were passing us, close enough to hear, but no one slowed down. To them, it probably looked like nothing. Two strangers. A brief exchange. You don't need to rush, he continued. You always rush. I tried to pull away. His grip tightened just slightly. I said I'm late, I told him, forcing my voice to stay calm. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You don't have to be scared, he said. I'd never hurt you. That was when panic finally cut through me. I twisted my arm free and stepped back so fast I nearly lost my balance. Don't touch me, I said. For a split second, his expression changed, the smile disappeared. Something colder took its place. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. He raised his hands, as if I'd misunderstood everything. I was only trying to help, he said loudly now, so others could hear. No need to get upset. A woman nearby glanced at us, then looked away. I walked off without turning back. My heart didn't slow down until I was on the bus, gripping the pole so tightly my fingers hurt. That night, I checked the lock on my door 3 times. Then 4. I told myself it was over. That setting a boundary was enough. I was wrong. Because the next day, he didn't wait by the bus stop. He was closer. The next morning, I didn't see him by the library. Relief washed over me so fast my knees felt weak. I told myself it was over. That one moment of fear didn't define weeks of harmless conversation. Walked toward my apartment that evening feeling lighter than I had in days. That's when I heard his voice. Long day? I stopped. He was standing across the street, near the entrance to my building. I hadn't told him where I lived. My pulse roared in my ears. How do you know I live here? I asked. He smiled, the same calm expression he'd always worn on the bench. You mentioned the brick building with the blue awning, he said. I remembered. I hadn't. At least, I didn't think I had. He stepped closer, hands visible, tone gentle. I was worried about you after yesterday, he said. You seemed upset. I backed toward the door. Please don't come here again, I said. This isn't appropriate. His smile thinned. I thought we had an understanding, he replied. After everything you've done for me. There it was. The debt. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them. Before I could pick them up, he bent down and handed them to me, his fingers brushed mine. You're safe, he said quietly. I wouldn't let anything happen to you. That sentence terrified me more than a threat ever could. I went inside and locked the door, sliding down against it as soon as I was alone. That night, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. You forgot your umbrella this morning. I'll bring it tomorrow. I stared at the screen, my chest tight. I had left the umbrella in my apartment hallway. I hadn't carried it outside. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, one truth was unavoidable. This wasn't gratitude. This wasn't kindness misunderstood. This was control. And if I didn't act soon, I knew exactly how stories like this ended. I didn't go to the bus stop the next morning. Instead, I called the community center 2 blocks from my apartment and asked to speak to their social services coordinator. My voice shook as I explained what had been happening. I expected doubt. Polite dismissal. What I got was quiet understanding. You're not overreacting, she said. And you're not alone. With her help, I documented everything, the dates, the places, the messages, the way my routine had been watched and learned. She connected me with a local outreach worker and a police liaison who specialized in harassment cases. For the first time in weeks, I felt grounded. That afternoon, I took a different route home. He wasn't there. The following day, neither was he. I later learned that he had been approaching other women in the area, using the same pattern. Small kindnesses. Familiarity. Pressure. I wasn't the first. But I was the one who spoke up. A month later, I passed the old bench by the library. It was empty. No figure waiting. No watchful eyes. Just sunlight on cracked pavement. I still think about how close I came to believing that fear was the price of compassion. It isn't. Kindness doesn't require silence. Safety doesn't require politeness, and the moment something feels wrong, you're allowed to walk away.